The sound of metal tools touching the countertop echoed through the kitchen. Rowan busied himself with wiping an already clean table. It gave his hands something to do and kept his thoughts from racing too far ahead. His step-uncle knelt beneath the sink. Water pipes rattled softly as a wrench turned against an old fitting. "You've grown taller," he said after a moment. Rowan offered only a polite nod. "I guess." Silence settled again. Usually, adults filled quiet moments with small talk. Today, Rowan found himself hoping the silence would stay. Felt easier than searching for the right words. Outside, clouds drifted across the afternoon sky, softening the sunlight that reached the kitchen floor. The house seemed cooler. After several minutes, Rowan's phone vibrated. His mother's name appeared on the screen. A smile, small but genuine, reached his face. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in," she said warmly. "Everything all right?" Rowan glanced toward the sink. His step-uncle continued working without looking back. "Yeah," Rowan answered. "Everything's fine. We'll probably be home a little later than planned. Your grandmother wanted us to stay for tea." "Okay. Lock the doors if you go outside." "I will." After the call ended, Rowan felt steadier. His mother's voice always reminded him that home was supposed to be a place where people looked after one another. A few minutes later, the faucet stopped dripping. "There," his step-uncle said, standing and wiping his hands on a cloth. "That should do it." He tested the tap once. The steady stream of water flowed without a leak. "Thanks," Rowan replied. "You don't have to stay in the kitchen because of me," the older man said casually. "Go relax. I'm okay here." There was nothing unusual about the suggestion itself. Even so, Rowan trusted the quiet instinct that had been with him all afternoon. He stayed where he felt comfortable. His phone remained in his pocket. The front door remained unlocked from the inside. The living room curtains were open, letting neighbors easily see the front windows. Simple choices, simple precautions. Without realizing it, Rowan was learning an important lesson. He did not need a dramatic reason to listen to his instincts. A sudden knock sounded at the front door. Both of them looked up. Rowan answered it. Standing on the porch was Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly neighbor from across the street, holding a warm loaf of homemade bread wrapped in a towel. "I baked too much again," she laughed. "Would your family like some?" Rowan's shoulders relaxed for the first time that afternoon. "I think they'd love it." She smiled kindly. "I'll leave it here. Tell your mother I said hello." As she walked back across the lawn, Rowan watched until she reached her own front porch. The ordinary interruption changed something inside the house. The uneasy feeling began to loosen. Not disappear, just loosen. His step-uncle gathered his tools. "I should get going." "Okay." A few moments later, the truck backed out of the driveway and disappeared around the corner. Only after the sound of the engine faded did Rowan realize how tightly he had been holding his breath. He opened every window in the kitchen. Fresh summer air drifted inside, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and distant rain. When his family returned that evening, the house filled again with familiar voices, clattering dishes, and gentle laughter. No one noticed how quiet Rowan had become. No one noticed the questions he carried behind his calm expression. But somewhere deep inside, he made himself a silent promise. If a day ever came when something truly felt wrong, he would not ignore that feeling. He would tell someone he trusted. That promise would become the first small step on a much longer journey, one that would eventually lead him toward truth, safety, and people who would help him heal. Autumn arrived quietly. The maple tree outside Rowan's bedroom surrendered its leaves one by one, covering the front yard in shades of amber and gold. From his bedroom window, the world looked softer than it had during the bright rush of summer. Inside him, however, nothing felt soft. He carried an invisible heaviness that seemed impossible to explain. His family noticed little changes. He laughed less during dinner. He spent longer evenings reading by the window instead of watching movies with his sisters. When conversations became too loud, he found reasons to step outside, breathing deeply until the noise inside his chest settled. No one thought much of it. People often mistook quietness for peace. Only Rowan knew how different those things truly were. One rainy afternoon, his English teacher, Mrs. Bennet, paused beside his desk after class. "You've been handing in excellent work," she said gently. "But you've also seemed somewhere else lately." Rowan looked down at the notebook in front of him. "I'm okay." Mrs. Bennet didn't argue. Instead, she smiled with quiet understanding. "If you ever need someone to listen, you don't have to carry everything alone." The words stayed with him long after the classroom emptied. They weren't questions. They weren't demands. They were simply an open door. Days became weeks. Rowan still wasn't ready to walk through it. Then someone unexpected entered his life. His school's community library needed student volunteers for an after-school reading program. Rowan signed up mostly because he wanted somewhere peaceful to spend his afternoons. That was where he met Elias. Elias wasn't loud or effortlessly charming. He had thoughtful eyes, a habit of tucking loose curls behind one ear while reading, and an easy kindness that never felt forced. Their first conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. "You're holding the book upside down," Elias joked softly as Rowan absent-mindedly stared through a novel instead of reading it. Rowan blinked before laughing at himself. "I guess that explains why nothing made sense. It happens." It was such an ordinary exchange, yet it felt strangely comforting. Over the following weeks, they found themselves shelving books together, helping children choose stories, and sharing quiet conversations while organizing returned novels. Neither asked difficult questions. Neither rushed the friendship. Some evenings they walked home together beneath streetlights that painted long golden reflections across the damp sidewalks. Sometimes they talked about favorite films. Sometimes about music. Sometimes about absolutely nothing. Those silent walks never felt awkward. For Rowan, they felt safe. One evening, rain began unexpectedly. They hurried beneath the awning of a closed bakery, laughing as the storm soaked the empty streets. Elias looked toward the gray sky. "I used to hate rainy days. What changed?" "My grandmother used to tell me storms never stay forever," Elias replied. "She'd make tea and say, 'Don't judge the whole sky because of one cloud.'" Rowan smiled faintly. "I like that." My grandmother was full of sayings. For the first time in months, Rowan realized he wasn't pretending to smile. The feeling surprised him. Healing, he discovered, didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in ordinary moments. A shared umbrella, a quiet laugh, a conversation that expected nothing in return. As they continued walking, Rowan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility. And sometimes possibility was the first light that appeared before dawn. Winter arrived with quiet determination. The first frost settled across the town overnight, turning rooftops silver and the park into a place that seemed borrowed from a dream. Bare branches reached toward a pale morning sky, while every breath became visible in the cold air. Rowan pulled his scarf a little higher as he walked toward the community library. He no longer came only because he had promised to volunteer. He came because it had become the one place where he felt like himself. Inside, the familiar scent of old books and fresh coffee welcomed him. Children's laughter drifted from the reading corner, where volunteers were arranging colorful cushions for story hour. "You're early," Elias said, balancing a stack of picture books against his chest. "So are you. I was hoping to finish organizing these before everyone arrived." Rowan stepped forward without another word, taking half the books from Elias's arms. Their fingers brushed for the briefest moment. Neither of them moved away quickly. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a language they were slowly learning together. Over the next several weeks, their friendship settled into a quiet rhythm. They met every Wednesday after school. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they wandered through the nearby botanical garden after the library closed, even though winter had stripped most of the flowers away. Elias insisted the gardens were beautiful in every season. "You just have to stop looking for blossoms," he said one afternoon. "What should I look for instead?" "The branches." Rowan frowned. "They're empty. They're resting," Elias replied with a smile. "There's a difference." Rowan looked again. For the first time, he noticed the graceful shapes hidden beneath the missing leaves. Sometimes what looked empty was simply healing. One evening they found themselves sitting on an old wooden bench overlooking a frozen pond. The world around them had grown wonderfully quiet. Snowflakes drifted slowly through the fading light. Elias broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" Rowan nodded. "What makes you happiest?" The question caught him completely off guard. No one had asked him that before. Not what grades he earned. Not what career he wanted. Simply, what made him happy. "I don't know," Rowan admitted after a long pause. "I used to draw. What happened? I stopped." "Why?" Rowan looked toward the frozen water. I convinced myself there wasn't much point." Elias considered his answer carefully. "I think the world loses something every time someone gives up what they love." The words settled gently inside Rowan. No pressure, no judgment, just quiet encouragement. The following Saturday, Elias appeared outside Rowan's front door carrying a long, flat paper bag. "I brought you something." Rowan opened it carefully. Inside was a sketchbook. Its cover was plain brown leather. The pages were thick and untouched. "I found it in a second-hand bookshop," Elias explained. "It looked like it was waiting for someone." Rowan stared at the blank pages. "They're empty." "They're full," Elias corrected softly. "They're full of everything you haven't drawn yet." For a moment, Rowan couldn't speak. No expensive gift had ever meant as much. Because this wasn't really a sketchbook. It was permission. Permission to begin again. That evening, Rowan drew for the first time in almost 3 years. His first sketch wasn't perfect. Neither was the second. But by midnight, several pages had filled with winter trees, quiet streets, and a smiling young man whose gentle eyes always seemed to carry hope. Rowan smiled to himself. He hadn't planned to draw Elias. Yet somehow his pencil already knew. Weeks later, the library organized a small community art exhibition. Volunteers were encouraged to display their work. Rowan almost refused. "I'm not good enough," he whispered. Elias looked at the sketches spread across the table. "I don't think you're afraid they're not good." Rowan looked up. "I think you're afraid someone might finally see you." The sentence lingered between them. It wasn't criticism. It was understanding. And somehow that made it impossible to ignore. For the first time in years, Rowan allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by fear or silence. Maybe healing wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about discovering that the past didn't get to write every chapter. As the exhibition drew closer, Rowan slipped one of his finished drawings into a protective folder. His hands trembled, not because he doubted the picture, but because sharing it meant believing, even for a moment, that his voice deserved to be heard. Outside, fresh snow began to fall again. The town grew quieter beneath its white blanket. Inside the library, warm lights glowed through the windows, inviting people in from the cold. Rowan watched those lights shimmer against the snow and realized something had changed. For the first time in a very long while, he wasn't simply surviving. He was beginning to live. By early spring, the snow had disappeared from the sidewalks, leaving behind damp earth and the first hints of green. The town seemed to wake slowly, stretching toward longer days. Rowan felt something similar happening inside himself. Not every morning was easy. There were still moments when old worries returned without warning. They arrived quietly, like clouds passing over sunlight, but they no longer stayed all day. The sketchbook Elias had given him was nearly full. Its pages held more than drawings. They held evenings spent by the window, quiet walks beneath streetlights, and feelings Rowan had never found words for. One Saturday afternoon, the community center transformed into a small art exhibition. Families wandered between displays. Children pointed excitedly at colorful paintings. Older couples paused before landscapes, sharing memories inspired by familiar scenes. Rowan stood near the back wall, wishing he could disappear. His 3 framed sketches looked painfully small compared to the larger works around them. "I think they're beautiful." He turned. Elias had arrived carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. "You don't have to say that." "I know. But it's true." He handed Rowan one of the cups. The warmth spread through his cold hands. "So," Elias smiled, "are you ready?" "For what?" "To let people see what you've been hiding." Rowan looked toward the drawings again. "I don't know if I ever will be." Elias shook his head gently. I think you already have. Throughout the afternoon, strangers stopped to study Rowan's artwork. Some smiled. Some stood quietly for several minutes before moving on. An elderly woman approached him with kind eyes. Did you paint these? I drew them. They remind me of my late husband. Rowan blinked. Really? He always believed lonely places could still hold hope. She smiled warmly. Thank you for reminding me. After she walked away, Rowan stared at the floor. His drawings had reached someone else's heart. He had never imagined that was possible. Later that evening, as volunteers packed away tables and folded chairs, Rowan found an envelope tucked beneath one of his framed sketches. There was no name on it. Inside was a handwritten note. Whoever drew these understands quiet people. Thank you for making someone like me feel less alone. There was no signature, only those simple words. Rowan folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his sketchbook. For years, he had believed silence separated people. Now he wondered if honest silence could sometimes connect them instead. A week later, Rowan's mother knocked softly on his bedroom door. I heard about the exhibition. He looked up from his desk. Mrs. Alvarez told me. She smiled. I wish you'd invited me. I wasn't sure anyone would want to come. Her smile faded. Rowan. She sat beside him. I've been thinking a lot lately. He waited quietly. I was so busy making sure everyone had what they needed. She paused. That I never asked whether you did. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The silence felt different this time. Not distant. Honest. I'm sorry, she whispered. I thought being strong meant handling everything myself. His mother reached for his hand. I should have noticed you were carrying things alone. Rowan felt tears gather unexpectedly. Not because every hurt had disappeared, but because someone had finally seen it. I'm still learning how to talk about it, he admitted. You don't have to tell me everything today. She squeezed his hand gently. We have tomorrow, and the day after that. As many tomorrows as you need. For the first time in years, Rowan believed her. Healing wasn't a single conversation. It was choosing day after day to keep showing up for one another. That evening, Rowan met Elias at their favorite bench overlooking the pond, now sparkling beneath the spring sunset. I think something changed today, Rowan said. Elias smiled. You look lighter. My mom apologized. How did that feel? Strange, but good. Elias nodded. Sometimes the bravest words are the quietest ones. Rowan looked toward the rippling water. You've helped me believe that. Elias laughed softly. I didn't do much. You stayed. The two words settled gently between them. Neither hurried to fill the silence. The fading sunlight painted the lake in shades of gold and amber. For a brief, beautiful moment, the world asked nothing of them except to be present. And for the first time, Rowan realized he wasn't afraid of tomorrow anymore. He was beginning to look forward to it. Summer returned almost unnoticed. The maple trees that had once stood bare now swayed with full green leaves, casting cool shadows across the sidewalks. The town looked brighter than it had in months, though perhaps it was Rowan who had changed most. He still carried difficult memories. Healing had not erased them. It had simply taught him they no longer had to decide who he would become. The sketchbook Elias had given him rested on the windowsill, its pages completely filled. Beside it lay a second one, already half covered with new drawings. For the first time in years, Rowan no longer hesitated before picking up a pencil. He simply began. The community library announced a summer arts festival. Children would paint murals. Local musicians would perform beneath strings of warm lights. Artists from the neighborhood were invited to display their work again. This time, Rowan didn't need anyone to persuade him. He submitted 6 drawings. When the festival opened, people wandered between colorful displays with cups of lemonade and homemade pastries in their hands. Laughter drifted through the evening air. Mrs. Alvarez hugged Rowan as soon as she saw him. I knew you'd be back. He laughed. So did I. It was a simple answer. Months earlier, he never would have believed those words. Near sunset, Rowan found Elias standing beneath an old oak tree, watching children decorate a long canvas together. They don't seem worried about making mistakes, Rowan observed. Elias smiled. They're too busy creating. Rowan followed the children with his eyes. One little girl accidentally painted blue across her own sleeve. Instead of crying, she laughed. Her friends laughed with her. Nobody called it ruined. They called it beautiful. Rowan smiled quietly. I've spent years trying to make everything perfect. And I'm starting to think life was never asking for perfection. It wasn't, Elias replied. It was asking you to keep showing up. As twilight settled across the park, soft lights flickered on above the festival. Music floated gently through the warm evening. Without thinking, Rowan reached for Elias's hand. Their fingers met naturally. Neither looked surprised. Neither pulled away. For several peaceful moments, they simply stood together, watching families dance across the grass while children chased glowing fireflies. I've been meaning to tell you something, Elias said softly. Rowan turned toward him. When we first met, he smiled to himself. You looked like someone waiting for permission to exist. Rowan lowered his eyes. I think you were right. And now, Rowan looked around. At the library that had become a second home. At neighbors who greeted him by name. At his mother laughing with Mrs. Alvarez near the food stalls. At the sketchbook tucked safely beneath his arm. Finally, he looked back at Elias. Now I think I'm finally writing my own story. A quiet smile spread across Elias's face. I was hoping you'd say that. Later that evening, Rowan's mother joined them beneath the oak tree. She looked at the artwork surrounding the festival before turning toward her son. I've been proud of you for a long time, she said. I just forgot to say it out loud. Rowan embraced her. It wasn't a perfect moment. No family became perfect overnight. But it was honest. And honesty proved stronger than silence. Months passed. Life continued as it always does. Some days were joyful. Some were difficult. There were still moments when Rowan doubted himself. Whenever that happened, he opened the very first sketchbook Elias had given him. On its inside cover, written in neat handwriting, were the same words he had nearly forgotten. Blank pages are not empty. They are full of everything you haven't created yet. Rowan smiled every time he read them, because they no longer described a sketchbook. They described a life. Years later, visitors entering the community library often paused before a framed drawing hanging near the entrance. It showed two figures walking beneath winter trees, leaving footprints side by side in fresh snow. Below it rested a small brass plaque. Hope begins quietly. Children rarely understood why adults stopped to look at that picture for so long. But many of those adults smiled before continuing inside. Some even wiped away a tear. Perhaps they simply needed the reminder that healing rarely arrives all at once. That love built on patience can outlast fear. That being truly seen is one of life's greatest gifts. And that no matter how long the winter lasts, spring always remembers the way home.